third straight election, however, to be postponed. Presidential elections in 2011 and 2015 were also delayed over logistical and security issues. Well, of course, our team in Nigeria has been following all these developments over the past week. Let's now cross over live to my colleague Richard Nta for the latest. Richard, of course, after that very disappointing weekend last weekend, everybody wants to know if things are on track for a smooth election this Saturday.
All right, thank you so much, Lindy. But to our viewers across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us on CGTN's continued coverage of Nigeria's elections. Lindy, to your question, the officials are ready. INEC is ready. The candidates' names are on the ballot papers and they are ready. The question that needs to be asked is, are the Nigerian people ready? Well, we'll find that out this Saturday when they turn up to elect their leaders en masse, or probably not. Will there be voter apathy is the question. Having said that, from my side, it seems like it's all systems go. However, the only concern is the recent killings in the state of Benue. We'll talk about that more later on in the show. INEC has agreed to allow the election campaigning to come to an end tonight, local time, 12 midnight. Philly Haza has more on that story. Let's go to him.
Campaign activities have been intense in Nigeria over the last 3 months, until they were halted by INEC last Thursday ahead of an election that never took place. So parties were able to resume their political campaigns for a few more days, ending 24 hours ahead of Saturday. The effect of the disruption to the campaign is unclear.
The politicians and the political parties themselves, they need it to put finishing touches to what they have done before and to make more outreach to the electorate in order to sway them to their side. So it's very, very necessary for them. However, I cannot be able to tell you whether the extension had made any impact or not. It's only them that will know whether the 3 days or a couple of days which they have been granted to go around has actually given them brighter chances or not. So we can only keep our fingers crossed and we wait to the D-Day and see what will be the total outcome of the whole exercise.
There are over 84 million eligible voters across the country. Although there are 73 aspirants running for president, the race to lead Nigeria for another 4 years is mainly between the incumbent Muhammadu Buhari and his main challenger, Atiku Abubakar, a former vice president. Many voters say the extended campaigns have not swayed them.
I think the reason for the campaign is even to further remind people, you understand, to even come out and vote, not basically because of their manifesto or anything. It's just for people to remember that, okay, the vote is still going to be happening on Saturday.
The extension did not influence me not to change or to change my mind concerning the person that I want to vote before or now. No. It's the same mind that I have in the beginning until the end of the election.
It's only if you're not sure that the campaign will change. But if you're already sure from the start, you know who you're voting for. I don't think 3 days campaign would change anything.
And these voters are hoping that the presidential elections will actually go ahead this time.
Last weekend was hugely controversial and disruptive in Nigeria, but millions of voters are now focused on exercising their civic rights in deciding who leads Africa's most populous nation. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Moving on, 16 people reported dead in the state of Benue. It is believed an attack was carried out by herdsmen. There is a history of violence between the herdsmen and farmers, which have resulted in thousands of lives being lost in recent years. Security forces are on the ground to restore peace and investigate the matter. We'll follow that more as we have continued coverage. But also moving on, the governor of Kaduna State here in Nigeria says that over 130 people were killed in an attack by gunmen in the northwest part of the country. The governor said this while meeting military and security chiefs in Abuja. Initial reports indicated that the number of victims were about 66 people. Victims' bodies were found in 8 villages in the Kajuru area of the state. The area has long been a center of deadly unrest, fueled by ethnic and religious tensions. State Police Chief Ahmed Abdurraham, who also attended the meeting, said 11 people have been arrested. Kaduna is one of the several northwest states that have been hit by kidnappings for ransom and cattle rustling by criminal gangs.
In my family, they killed 30 people.
As at the last count, over 130 people have been killed. So the 66 that was officially announced by the government actually were the people that were found in a massive grave, and then some few other people, close to those areas.
Well, what transpired is a kind of ethno-religious cleansing from the Kadara militia in Kajuru local government of Kaduna State, Nigeria, where a predominantly Fulani Muslim community of about 8 to 9 communities were, killed.
All right, let's join our correspondent, Robert Nagila, and present some pretty deep questions to him. Robert, thank you for joining us. First and foremost, sad news coming from Benue State. What measures does the government have in place to ensure peace in this coming elections?
Well, they are taking security concerns very, very seriously. Now, in recent days, we've seen President Muhammadu Buhari meeting his top security chiefs and reviewing the measures around this particular elections. Now, what measures have they taken? Well, judging by what we saw barely a week ago, when just before the election was concerned, we expect the country's borders to be, land borders that is, to be shut down for at least 48 hours, that is between Friday evening and Sunday. Now, there will also be a curfew in place from Saturday midnight up to Saturday 4 p.m. This is to allow the electoral process to carry on smoothly. No traffic, no vehicles will be allowed on the roads apart from those from the Electoral Commission, observers, the media and the Electoral Commission staff. We also understand that the VIP protection units, these are units that provide security to VIPs, have been recalled to their stations and are being deployed all around the country. Now, we're talking about tens of thousands of security forces engaged in this particular operation, a huge, huge operation, especially if you take into consideration the fact that there are just over 119,000 polling stations scattered across the country. Then you begin to understand the enormity of this exercise. Now, apart from that, the government has also announced a public holiday on Friday, which is tomorrow, to allow people to travel to their respective stations where they registered as voters, where they will be able to vote. So security remains a huge, huge concern, but the government is confident that all the measures they've taken will be adequate for this operation. And President Muhammadu Buhari himself warning any disruption from any entities or any individuals to this electoral process will be dealt with very, very harshly. Richard?
All right, Robert, let's talk about, you talked about security. Let's really dig into it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how serious is the possibility of violence this coming weekend?
Well, the threat of violence remains. I mean, that is absolutely no doubt, especially considering some of the events leading up to this election over the last few months. Now, I put those threats into 3 particular categories, and here I'm referring to the main threats to this particular election. The first threat is Boko Haram. Then you also have intercommunal violence and then post-election violence. Those are the 3 main threats at this moment to this particular exercise. Now, the main concern is that any violence at any particular stage within this particular process could lead to a disruption of the electoral exercise, which would then call the credibility of this whole entire exercise into question. And coming just a week after the election was postponed, that is not going to be a scenario that anyone in Nigeria, from the Electoral Commission and the country at large, will be contemplating. It's not something that they want to contemplate, because if it's called into credibility, then that also raises the further prospect of post-election violence, which is something that they are trying to avoid. But they believe that they've prepared adequately for all these threats, both big and small. And we will now it's just hours, basically, well, a day and a half or so before polling stations open. and then we'll be able to gauge exactly whether this security preparations are adequate enough for the exercise. But I hasten to add, the government says, and the police have added on to that as well, that they are prepared. Now, just very quickly, Richard, the military, I've not talked about the military. What we're going to see at the polling stations will be the police and their backups, but the military will not be at the polling stations. They will be used as a backup, if need be, to the police forces on the ground if any threat is reported or by the police force themselves. Richard?
Excellent reporting, Robert. Thank you for your insight and analysis. Moving on, let's talk about business. Nigeria's Trade and Investment Ministry says it is in talks with foreign investors to revive Nigeria's rundown textile industry. For decades, the textile industry was a key driver of Nigeria's economy, but dozens of mills were forced to shut down as Nigeria diverted its attention to the oil industry. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam tells us the story of former workers who have relentlessly pushed for the revival of the textile industry. Let's take a look.
An enduring bond. These are former textile workers of Kaduna, joined by widows of departed colleagues. United for a common cause, most of them past their 70s. They have formed a political pressure group for years, and they've been mounting pressure on successive governments to revive the textile mills.
Let them reopen. We're not even talking about entitlement yet, but they should reopen the mills so that people will come in and work. Our children who are out of school will come in and work.
Wardam Simdik is the chairman of the former Kaduna Textile Workers Union. He was employed in this mill in the 70s, and 30 years after, an industry that employed 500,000 workers in Nigeria's north was shut down.
At the end of the time, when KTL closed around 2002, some of the machines were being vandalized by our boys here, these boys here in the community, within the community. So the owners of the place decided that instead of allowing the whole something to be vandalized, they now options these machines out.
The textile mills, altogether 10 of them in Kaduna State, now sit in utter ruin, while the people who were laid off tell a harrowing tale.
I can't of my children that this is how they are living. I can't give. Because this is too much. The condition is getting worse. It's getting worse. What I'm doing now, I have to go to some houses. At least I wash, take care of the house. I will take care, wash, clean house. Whatever they give, that's what we live.
Previous administrations attempted to revive the textile mills, but with no success. Now President Buhari's government is in talks with foreign investors to revive the industry, and not just in northern Nigeria alone.
We're working with the Chinese, the Rui group from China. He's talking to us about, investing in 3 of those parks. One in Lagos, one in Enyimba City in Abia State, and also in Kano State. And they announced that they will make investments of up to $2 billion. And this is to revive our textile sector.
This could be the most ambitious effort to revitalize Nigeria's textile industry. It could see rebuilding of mills as well as substantial investment in cotton production. And millions will be waiting eagerly for a takeoff. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, it's less than 48 hours to go to Nigeria's much-awaited, much-anticipated elections for the team. I'm Richard Searle saying thank you so much for watching, and we will be right back here same time tomorrow. It's right back to you, Lindy, in studio.
Thank you so much to Richard and the team there in Nigeria for bringing us up to speed on the Nigerian elections. And of course, as he says, just 48 hours to go till that much-anticipated poll. All right, now let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Well, Senegal too gears up for elections on Sunday. And Kenya's LGBT community holds prayers ahead of a key ruling on their rights on Friday.
Don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Senegal is gearing up for Sunday's presidential elections. This will be the country's 11th vote since independence. The Minister of Interior, Ali Ndiaye, has been meeting with various election observers as part of efforts to ensure a smooth and credible vote. Observers include members of the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the Economic Community of Central African Member States. The minister says voting will take place in over 15,000 polling stations, and an estimated 6 million people are eligible to vote. Observers have appealed to voters to maintain calm during the exercise.
6,919. Voter card distribution is ongoing and will continue until the day before the elections. To the Senegalese living in the diaspora, they will receive them on the actual voting day. We're optimistic and convinced that the presidential elections, slated for February 24, 2019, will be successful.
Nous pensons qu'il y aura une élection libre.
Based on our observations, we believe that there will be a free and transparent election. For example, the 250,000 cards that hadn't yet been distributed are currently being distributed, so we expect the Senegalese people who are yet to collect their cards will do so they may practice their democratic right.
A former prime minister who has made several unsuccessful bids at the presidency. There is also Madick Niang, who worked in several ministries under Abdoulaye Wade's presidency. Finally, Issa CGTN.
Well, incumbent President Macky Sall has been at the helm for the last 7 years. The presidential field of 5 is the smallest since 1988. Two of Senegal's best-known opposition figures were ruled out because of corruption convictions. Here's a look at Macky Sall's record.
With the election just days away, the voters are gearing to cast their ballot. President Macky Sall is likely to secure the top seat for a second term. However, heavy-handed crackdowns by security forces during protests have prompted accusations that the incumbent has an authoritarian streak. Rights groups say it represents a crackdown on dissent in a country long seen as West Africa's most stable democracy. Frustration with the incumbent is palpable once again among the educated youth who struggle to find jobs. However, many voters and foreign backers applaud Sall for boosting economic growth to over 6%, one of the highest rates in Africa last year.
The magnitude of this victory, with the appearance of a plebiscite, expresses the immensity of the people's expectations. I understand completely. Tonight, a new era begins for Senegal.
Opinion polls are banned in the run-up to elections, but a widely cited survey conducted by a Senegalese data company in November gave Sall 45% support, while none of the other candidates had more than 16%. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
In other news, U.S. and Sudanese officials are currently in negotiations to remove the country from the list of sponsors of terrorism. Senior Director for Africa at the U.S. National Security Council, Cyril Sato, has warned that excessive violence used by Sudanese security forces to quell protests could threaten the talks. He's been in Khartoum for 4 days. Deadly protests rocked Sudan in December after a government decision to triple the price of bread. They have now escalated into calls for freedom and justice. security forces have been accused of using excessive force. President Omar al-Bashir has rejected accusations that security forces killed protesters.
It is in the interest of the United States and certainly the government of Sudan that we try to find a way to stop the violence that's occurring in the country first, and secondarily to try to get these negotiations back on track, because we earnestly want them to succeed.
Ethiopia's new refugee law grants asylum seekers access to key rights such as work permits, primary education and driver's licenses. The move comes after the UN General Assembly agreed to the Global Compact on Refugees last year. Many refugees are hopeful that the law, which was passed in January, will provide tangible benefits. Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
In 2015, Bethlehem Tesfashon, an Eritrean refugee, found a home in Ethiopia where her 5 sisters and 3 brothers had already sought asylum. They all fled from what she says was an environment with no opportunity. They decided to start designing and selling clothes. But they are forced to operate using the license of an Ethiopian citizen because refugees in Ethiopia are not allowed to have work permits.
We try to find some people and friends who can do the licensing, or the legal passes, so that then we can work under their name. That's how we do it. That was the only choice.
That is, however, about to change, with Ethiopia's refugee agency confirming a new law will allow refugees to work and get employed on merit in all sectors.
Refugees can own work permit to get hired, fulfilling the requirements of vacancies by private sector, or in most cases private sector or companies and the like. They will have vacancies, they have requirements. If refugees fulfill that, and within the limits of the rights given for foreigners who legally reside in Ethiopia, refugees will have the most favorable treatment.
Refugees like Bethlehem are eagerly waiting for this new law to go into effect so they can fully own their businesses.
The many challenge that we face is we have our products, but we don't have the copyright or we cannot patent it. So even if we sell, we make some money, but other people make more money with our designs. So that is a good thing for us, and having it on our name is also a plus.
Ethiopia currently hosts over 900,000 refugees, primarily from neighboring South Sudan, Somalia, Sudan and Eritrea, as well as a smaller number of refugees from Yemen and Syria. Refugees with academic credentials will now be allowed to practice their profession in areas permitted to foreign nationals, excluding the military and defense forces. The UN Refugee Agency has praised the law as being progressive, but efforts are ongoing to convince some of the local population.
We are conducting sensitization programs, starting from the government organs, step by step, to all partners and to the grassroots level also. We have already started in the local media, radio, television, repeatedly doing this awareness creation program, so that we will not be that much a challenge as such in this regard.
Protests in the Gambela region of the country and the capital Addis Ababa against the new law were dispersed by police before they happened. Close to 1 million refugees will benefit from this new move. The government says that specific entrepreneurial opportunities for refugees will be supported by special coordination between the government and the international community. For Bethlehem and her sisters, the idea of having their own label on their clothes has never been closer. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Kenya is set to rule on decriminalizing gay sex on Friday. The much-awaited ruling by Kenya's High Court could make history. The Cosmopolitan Affirming Church is a rare space where Kenya's LGBT community can escape hostility from society. Dozens of LGBT churchgoers and their allies crammed into a tiny room to worship ahead of the ruling. Under sections of Kenya's penal code, gay sex is illegal and punishable by up to 14 years in jail. The law was introduced to Kenya during British colonial rule more than 120 years ago.
There is a charge for those people who feel like in their faith spaces they are not included, they are not welcomed. So we say, you know what, God loves you for who you are.
It's a cocktail of just issues that are brought about by the existence of these laws. You find that LGBTQ people are unable to enjoy their freedom of association, which is also enshrined in the Bill of Rights.
How will your world change today?
Oh, all four. Okay, cool. Thank you.
What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Recapping your top stories this hour, campaign activities in Nigeria are expected to end at 12 midnight local time on Thursday. Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission set the extended deadline after elections due last weekend were postponed. The rescheduled polls are now due to take place on Saturday, February 23rd. Meanwhile, Senegal is also gearing up for presidential elections on Sunday. This will be the country's 11th vote since independence. Minister of Interior Ali Ndaye has been meeting with various election observers as part of efforts to ensure a smooth and credible vote. Observers include members of the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and the Economic Community of Central African Member States. U.S. and Sudanese officials are currently in negotiations to remove the country from the list of sponsors of terrorism. Senior Director for Africa at the U.S. National Security Council, Cyril Sato, has warned that excessive violence used by Sudanese security forces to quell protests could threaten the talks. He's been in Khartoum for 4 days. Deadly protests rocked Sudan in December after a government decision to triple the price of bread. And Kenya is set to rule on decriminalizing gay sex on Friday. The much-awaited ruling by Kenya's High Court could make history. Dozens of LGBT churchgoers and their allies crammed into a tiny room to worship ahead of the ruling. Under sections of Kenya's penal code, gay sex is illegal and punishable by up to 14 years in jail. The law was introduced to the country during British colonial rule more than 120 years ago. And those are your top stories this hour. Let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Cindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Tanzania's GDP is now larger by nearly 4% after rebasing. And MPs in Uganda passed laws to set workers minimum wages.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Tanzania. The country has changed the base year it used to calculate economic output in 2015. Now, data from the National Bureau of Statistics showed its economy was about 3.8% larger in 2015 at about $40.56 billion. Now, Tanzania last rebased its economy in 2014. Its GDP was about 107.67 trillion shillings in 2017. However, it did not calculate the impact the rebasing had on the figure. Back in March 2018, the Statistics Office put the East African country's 2017 GDP at about 50.53 trillion shillings. That's using 2007 constant prices. Now, farming remains Tanzania's economic mainstay. Industry and construction and services are the other key sectors. And in Uganda, lawmakers have passed the minimum wage bill. Now, the Gender, Labour and Social Development Minister will appoint a board to fix a minimum wage based on different sectors in the country's economy. The proposed law attracted a lot of debate from several legislators who expressed the need for such a law to eradicate poverty as well as to address sharp income inequalities. Now, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, however, has previously complained that such a law will put off investors. The bill will become law following the president's assent. And energy security still remains the biggest challenge facing the African continent. Around 600 million Africans currently live in darkness. While delegates from across Africa and the rest of the world have come together at this year's Africa Energy Indaba in Johannesburg to find a practical solution to the problem. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
The number of Africans who now have access to electricity has grown over the last 10 years, but at least half the population is still powerless.
Over the last 10 years, we've really seen countries prioritize access to electricity. Many countries have enacted policies that allow private investors. We've seen a lot of independent power producers coming, but we've also seen transformation of many state utilities to ensure that they are more efficient, that they can serve electricity, more effectively.
Electricity has been supplied mostly by state companies in the past. There has, however, been a steady increase in private sector investment, especially in the renewables sector. The continent still needs around $40 billion a year to develop energy infrastructure.
Public money is not enough, which is why we're moving towards public-private partnerships. The main difficulty is how to apply a PPP on a cross-border project. We know quite well how to do it nationally, but regionally it implies harmonization of regulatory frameworks. It implies good coordination between governments. So it's more difficult, but we are moving in that direction.
African countries have also relied on single large producers to supply the bulk of electricity, but that's changing as the continent develops and demands grow.
Africa cannot afford to discriminate from sources of power because we still have over 600 million people without electricity, meaning these people are not involved in the economic process, meaning that industrialization will lag behind.
A reliable energy supply is crucial to the economic development of the continent, and African nations now have the mammoth task of ensuring universal access to electricity by 2030. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, South Africa's state-owned airline, South African Airways, is expected to receive a cash injection of about $442 million from the government. Now, the airline still needs about $844 million over the next 2 years before it can break even. The country's national carrier has been struggling financially for years and is now near to bankruptcy. Adding to its woes, the airline has been ordered to pay its rival, Comair, about $78 million in order to settle an anti-competition case. Now, Comair, which operates British Airways and low-cost carrier Kulula, filed a complaint with the Competition Commission 14 years ago. It accused SAA of offering incentives to travel agents to book customers on SAA flights.
SAA is on record having indicated that we will need a 21.7 billion to fully implement our turnaround strategy in order to get to a break-even point. So that particular message took into account a number of risks that we'll have to deal with, including this particular one. So at the end of the day, notwithstanding the decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal last Friday, our position is that we need only 21.7 billion and not any amount more. So we should be able, in the event we are able to get a response from the shareholder insofar as our funding requirements are concerned, we should be able to address and attend to this particular matter.
Now, Johannesburg, South Africa's largest city, is getting a facelift. Renovation efforts started a few years ago, but it's taking time due to a crime and desolation. Now, many of the city's original buildings are also dilapidated after wealthier tenants moved out of the city to the smarter upmarket Sandton CBD. But the city is slowly transforming into a multicultural hub that's once again attracting corporate clients. Retail giant Edcon, which still
stores in the Johannesburg CBD. The retailer is running at a loss and is trying to find investors to recapitalize its massive debt. But it has plans to revamp this Edgar's store downtown in an effort to revive the brand and improve sales.
This developer, we've been working very closely. They're in fact improving the economics for us because they're bringing other retailers into this development. So actually, our turnover should remain the same, our space should go down, and our total rent will go down.
We've got Edcon coming in on the first floor at about 4,000 square meters. They currently occupy close to 15,000 square meters of space. We're going one level lower, we're putting lounge shops in. We're going one level lower in the basement, we're putting in a gym there. It unlocks value for us as landlords and gives offering to other people and patrons in the CBD.
Joburg Mayor Herman Mashaba is leading a campaign to get the private sector back into the city.
This actually fits in so perfectly well with our plan as a city of Johannesburg, because when we bring people into the city, they need departmental stores, they need investments and so forth. So this for me was music. It is music to my ear.
Over $38 billion is being pumped into the city to reverse the decay. There will be an increase in police presence to make the streets safer. Hijacked and abandoned buildings are being seized and earmarked for redevelopment.
We've got already at the moment 84 properties that we've made available to the private sector to give us proposal to build high-rise building, affordable accommodation for our people. Within the next month or so, I'll be presenting to council another 80 to 100 buildings for redevelopment by the private sector.
It's a mammoth task trying to restore Johannesburg to its former glory, but developers have been extremely successful in some parts.
Mabaneng, which was once overrun by crime and vagrants, has become an urban art district that embraces the work-live-play concept. It's also popular with tourists. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And moving on now, Standard Chartered Bank has set aside about $900 million to cover fines resulting from regulatory investigations in the US and the UK. Now, the global lender revealed that the provision is set to include a fresh $133.6 million penalty from the UK city watchdog. It will also cover historical violations of US sanctions laws, as well as previously disclosed foreign exchange probes relating to trading issues. Now, the multinational bank has been facing scrutiny from regulators over its prior dealings with clients facing US sanctions. Standard Chartered is expected to include the provision in its full-year results due next week. And German German car maker Volkswagen's South African unit expects to produce a record number of vehicles this year, despite a sluggish domestic economy, power outages, as well as looming talks with unions. But 2019 will present major challenges to the South African auto industry as a whole. The economy, which slipped into recession last year, is expected to grow by just 1.3% this year. That's according to the World Bank, which is less than half of the global average. Well, CGTN's Asta Toll takes us through how the German car maker plans on boosting production in Africa.
Volkswagen Group South Africa manufactured nearly 126,500 vehicles in 2018. It plans to ramp up output to 161,900 vehicles this year, with 108,000 destined for export, according to Thomas Schaefer. Boosted by the popularity of its Vivo and Polo models, VW was a South African leader in passenger vehicles last year, with nearly 20% of market share. As part of a strategy to focus on new and upcoming markets, the German car maker has signed agreements with governments in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Ethiopia.
Strategically, you have the West, the ECOWAS region, Ghana, Nigeria. You have the East with Kenya, the EAC, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and so on. And you have Ethiopia at the Horn. So the idea that we are pushing very strongly, and in my second job, I'm also a president of the Association of the African Manufacturers. We are trying to connect Africa. So the idea is to say, hey, why don't we work together? Why don't we get these clusters right, acknowledging that regions like ECOWAS or EAC also want to have their automotive industry. But if every country by themselves trying to build up an automotive industry, it's going to be difficult.
Volkswagen will be tabling a pan-African auto pact idea to the African Union in the next few weeks, in an attempt to connect various regions in a way that will develop sustainable businesses.
The big deal will be what we call Pan-African Auto Pact, where we connect the powerhouses of Africa into a Pan-African auto industry that could sort of complement each other in their efforts and accept local content in each region. And all of a sudden, we've got sustainable businesses all over, not like little businesses everywhere that do everything. So the idea we bring to the African Union in the next 4 weeks. We've got a lot of support from World Economic Forum. We've spoken to the EAC many times over. General Secretary is supporting it. So there is immense support in this game. If we get it right, there's a 4 million vehicle market just between these regions. 4 million cars, that is around about 30 big factories. But big factories, not small factories. We're talking like significant manufacturing. Everybody could win.
Angola has also approached Volkswagen about possibly building an assembly plant and introducing a ride-hailing service, which is set to launch in Rwanda next month.
Let's find those countries who want to make a difference. Rwanda being the first, Kenya the next, Ghana came up, Nigeria. So, yeah, there might be disruptions, so here and there, politically induced or elections or whatever not happening. But these countries are eager to make a change. And I'd much rather work with those and get it done, and then we go from there to the next. So that's the whole reason why we get it done. So it wasn't to sort of look away from England or from the US and find other ways. Surely, I mean, in the long run, Africa is the only growth region that hasn't been explored. But at the time, it was really something to say, come on, if you can do it in South Africa, certainly we can do it in the rest of Africa.
The move to boost production in Africa comes after the German car maker announced it will establish the Volkswagen Motorsport Academy. The Academy's main goal will be to ensure the sustainability of motorsport and especially circuit racing going forward. Asatal, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, Tanzania has now rebased its economy. We'll be discussing what that means for the East African country. Of course, all that and more coming up top of the hour. For now, it's back to you.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Up next, a look at the last of Nigeria's dyeing pits.
Join us for Global Business. See Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
To South Africa now, where troops marched, fighter jets roared and warships patrolled the coast at this year's Armed Forces Day in Cape Town, South Africa. The country's President Cyril Ramaphosa once again officiated the event, and all eyes were fixed to the skies for the day's action. CGTN's Travis Andrews was there and filed this report.
As one of the most advanced defense forces on the African continent, much was expected of South Africa's men and women in uniform on Armed Forces Day, and they didn't disappoint. A parade of military hardware and personnel marched proudly down the streets, saluting their Commander-in-Chief, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who kept a close eye over proceedings. The day was not only a show of force and capabilities, though. It was also meant to reach out to the broader community and show off an armed forces that many can be proud of.
This is all about showing the public the capabilities of the defense force, what we have actually for in defense of our country, and actually for the youth out there, they can see what this actually the defense force is doing for its country. Everyone actually in the country can also have to get to see what is actually doing to our country.
Pomp and ceremony aside, many came for the big stuff. The fighter jets capable of stunning defensive and offensive maneuvers, and the Special Forces Regiment, who simulated a full-scale hostage rescue. A key part of the Armed Forces Day is also to find new talent, the next generation of men and women that will be tasked with protecting the country in the future.
What is critical is that we need willing and volunteering citizens of the country. We don't want people who come here for job seeking, and we are here to support that drive so that everybody can understand. Even when the young ones are taken by the Defense Force and are in training, the parents must understand what is that the young ones are doing, what is that the Defense Force can offer to the community of South Africa.
In total, over 8,500 troops participated, as well as countless other military assets in the country's arsenal. And what it showed is that South Africa is a nation that can certainly hold its own against any foe, in peacetime or in war. It seems then like a mission accomplished for the armed forces, who not only put on a capable demonstration for the head of state, but also for the many Cape Townians who waited all year for this event to take place. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
And to Nigeria now, where for 500 years, the dyers of Kano have crouched over circular pits near the mud city wall, plunging fabrics into water infused with indigo. The purple cotton of Kano was once famous throughout Africa's and the arid Sahel belt, but now more than 100 pits have fallen into disrepair, and many of them are clogged with refuse and stones. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has that story.
The last of Nigeria's dye pits. Here, the ancient northern city of Kano, they are said to have been in operation for 5 centuries. They now appear to be abandoned, and there is foreign competition everywhere. Founded in 1498, the Kofar Matsa pits are said to be the oldest in Africa and are the only survivor of Kano's dye trade, which once included 13 pit complexes. The hand-woven local cotton is much stronger than imported machine fabrics, and many are calling for government to do more to protect the traditional industry.
So yeah, we have not too much technology because our idea, our government, they are not help our idea to hold our idea to do it. So normally they forget it.
Everything done spoil. You see, before that time, spend for inside 1,000 while you have it, you with your family, you go another day you go use it again, and now when you get.
The dye pits have attracted travelers and traders from across the vast Sahel region to Kano. The fabrics are still used today by the nomadic, well-wrapped ethnic Tuareg. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news. Libya prepare for their must-win Africa Cup of Nations qualifier against